right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for attending. I know it's early. I know there's a lot going on with the state budget and stuff, but we never, we tend to not plan our research around always the most opportune times because there's always stuff going on in the busy schedules around here. So thanks for joining us here today. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Aldis. I'm the Vice President for Ohio Policy and Advocacy at the Fordham Institute. We feel lucky to be able to be the ones to sponsor this research today, to have been able to fund it. The idea of this actually came out of a discussion we had after a previous research project we had with the professors who did the work here, Dr. Deven Carlson from the University of Oklahoma and Dr. Stefan Lavartu of Ohio State University. I used to live in Florida. He's not moving, not that I know of, so don't worry. Anyway, they did a study for us a couple years ago on school closures and what happens to student achievement when schools close. And obviously it's a very painful thing when a school closes, but we wanted to look at and see sort of what the impact was on student achievement. And after that we had a conversation about, well, what other things could we look at? Policies and programs that are around where we need more exploration to see what really happens to students when these programs, which are all well-intended, are in force and in play, what actually happens. So we're excited today to have them here to present their research. We'll also then have a panel discussion. This morning, if you've been with us before, we're following our similar format. I hate to be boring, but I call it predictable, not boring. So what we'll have is Dr. Carlson will stand up and walk you through a PowerPoint, going through some of the presentation and findings. And then we'll have a quick transition. Have a panel discussion, which I'm really excited. Can't wait to introduce the panel that'll be here today. People who have experience on the ground with open enrollment, both from a superintendent perspective and a parent perspective. And then I'll ask them a few questions, and then you'll have the opportunity to ask questions yourselves. So, without further ado, Dr. Carlson, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'd like to thank everyone for being here this morning to hear about Interdistrict Open Enrollment in Ohio. We're going to talk about participation and student outcomes. As Chad said, I'm Deven Carlson at the University of Oklahoma, and my co-author on this was Stefan Lavartu here at Ohio State. So to give a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Interdistrict Open Enrollment in general, just to give you some background information, and then talk in more detail about Ohio's program. After we have that understanding, I'll move on to talking about the districts that participate in Ohio's program, and then follow that with a brief discussion of student participation. I will talk about the characteristics of students who open enroll and compare them to the characteristics of students who don't. And for students that open enroll, I will look at the dynamics. I'll talk briefly about the dynamics of their participation. Are they stable in their participation? Do they transfer in and out of open enrollment? After that, I'll talk a little bit about the relationship between open enrollment and access to school and district quality, and follow that up with a discussion of student outcomes, focusing primarily on student achievement and a little bit on high school graduation. And I'll conclude with a few points of discussion that we will follow up on in our panel. So, at a basic level, interdistrict open enrollment allows students to attend school in a district other than the one where they live, attend public school. Minnesota implemented the first open enrollment policy way back in 1988, but Ohio was close on its heels. In the next year or two, Ohio implemented its own open enrollment policy. Over time, there have come to be two primary forms of interdistrict open enrollment. Mandatory policies, which compel districts to accept students, or districts to accept students from outside their district, subject to some limitations or exceptions, and voluntary policies, which make it, as the name implies, voluntary for districts to accept those non-district students. As I'll talk about in a second, Ohio has a voluntary policy, and we'll talk about the details of that. Even though we don't hear about open enrollment as much as, say, charters or private school vouchers, it's among the largest and most widespread school choice policies in the country. There are only 7 states that don't have some form of interdistrict open enrollment. 10 states have both mandatory and voluntary policies. The the state will make it mandatory for districts to accept some students and maybe students who are at risk or students with disabilities, but make it voluntary to accept students from the broader student population. 21 states, including Ohio, has a voluntary only policy. Actually, Ohio is one of the 10 states with both, but I'm going to focus primarily on the voluntary policies today. And then 13 states have a mandatory only policy. So what does open enrollment look like in Ohio? Well, it is among the first programs established in the country. And today it's used by more than 72,000 students, which is quite a large number of students. In this voluntary program in Ohio, districts can choose to refuse all interdistrict transfers to not participate in the program. They can allow transfers from any district, or they can choose a middle ground and only allow transfers from adjacent districts. I'll provide some statistics on that in just a minute, but that's a broad overview of what districts can and cannot do, or can choose to do. Districts accepting transfers that choose to participate, their state policy states that they must specify their capacity by grade, school, and educational program to basically say, here are the options available for non-district students. They must articulate how transfers will be assigned to those schools. There has to be a set policy. It can't be determined on a student-by-student basis. And they are not allowed to select students on the basis of athletic or academic or artistic abilities. There are 5 more important aspects of the policy in Ohio that I think are worth understanding. First, the districts must prioritize the enrollment of in-district students. They must serve all in-district students before they accept students from outside the district. Second, they're allowed to refuse enrollment on the basis of disciplinary history. I believe the specifications is if a student has been suspended for more than 10 days or expelled in the prior year, districts are allowed to refuse that transfer application. They must maintain appropriate racial balance. That's stated in state policy. Resident districts have no transportation responsibilities. And so that implicitly, effectively puts all responsibilities on the parents. And that is oftentimes a hurdle to greater levels of interdistrict open enrollment participation. And finally, state dollars follow the student. So when a student moves from District A to District B, the state allocation moves with that student. In recent years, I think it's been about $5,800. But local funding is unaffected by those transfers. So that's an overview of what the Ohio program looks like. What does district participation look like? Well, we have a large and growing majority of districts that participate in interdistrict open enrollment. Over time, the percentage of districts that accept students from any district has grown from about 66% about 5 years ago to 73% last year. That's been corresponded to a slight decline from 23% to about 19% in the percentage of districts that don't accept any out-of-district transfers. So we do see this slow but steady growth in participation among districts in Ohio. What does this look like geographically? Well, when we mapped it, it became very clear that non-participating districts are clustered in the suburbs around Ohio's Big 8 school districts. So we have one big cluster of non-participation around Columbus, second around Cleveland, Dayton, and then Akron and Canton, it's less so. But the non-participating districts are, by and large, suburban districts surrounding the urban areas in Ohio. That's what it looks like geographically. When we look at it statistically, we see that comparing it to participating districts, those that opt out of Ohio's interdistrict open enrollment program are larger. On average, there are 4,500 students versus about 2,000 students in those non-participating. And that's driven primarily by the fact that nearly all small rural districts participate in the program. Non-participating districts are more affluent. 31% of students are economically disadvantaged in non-participating districts versus about 45% in districts that do accept non-district transfers. They are higher achieving. The average achievement level is about 70th percentile in non-participating districts versus about the state average in those that do. And they're more racially and ethnically diverse, although there's a caveat to that. Non-participating districts are about 74% white, while participating districts are on average about 90% white. But if you compare those non-participating districts to the big 8 districts they surround, they're significantly less diverse. We have about 30% white in the big 8 on average versus that 74% figure in the non-participating districts. So that's a statistical presentation of district participation. All right, who are the students that utilize the program? Well, we see a growing number of them. Stefan and I have mapped open enrollment participation levels. We've included charter levels for a point of comparison. We hear a lot about charter enrollment, less so about open enrollment. But we see that open enrollment participation has grown from about 50,000 students in 2008, 2009 to almost 70, it was about 72,000 in the most recent year for which we have data. In contrast, charter schools have grown to about 115,000, 110,000 students over that time period. Compared to those who attend school in their resident districts to students who don't open enroll, across the entire state, those who open enroll are disproportionately white, disproportionately affluent, and somewhat higher achieving. It's not a large difference on the achievement basis, about 3 to 4 percentile points, but it's there, you see it. Interestingly though, when we compare participating students to non-participating students within a district, those racial disparities completely disappear, which suggests that those differences we see at the state level are a product of differential opportunities. That African American students just have less opportunity to transfer into other districts because of district participation decisions than do their white peers. Although when we do this within district comparison, although those racial disparities disappear, all those other differences I talk about, the socioeconomic and the achievement disparities, they maintain or even grow slightly, but we continue to see those. So when we look among students who participate, about a third of them are entirely stable in their participation. And what I mean by that is, for each year we have data on a student, we observe them open enrolling. We never observe them attending school in their resident district. In contrast, about 2/3 of students who ever open enroll, we are a bit less stable in their participation. And by that I mean, we observe them attending school in their home district in 1 year, at least 1 year, and open enrolling in at least 1 year. So they transfer in and out of open enrollment. And if we look at these two groups of students, students who are consistent in their participation are relatively advantaged in terms of achievement, socioeconomics, those measures we have. Whereas those who are less stable, they look more like the average student in the state in terms of their socioeconomics and their achievement levels. So a main goal of open enrollment is to gain access to higher quality districts and schools. And so what we did here is we compared the districts that students attended via open enrollment to their resident district on 4 major indicators of school quality: the graduation rate, Ohio's performance index, value-added measures, and achievement levels. And by and large, what we see is that students who open enroll do transfer to districts that are higher achieving or of higher quality on these 4 measures. The improvements are somewhat larger for white students than black students, but they're there for both races and for all students overall. Now students, they attend the school in a district, but what's really important is what school do they attend? Unfortunately, we can't come up with a really clean comparison of the difference between the resident school and their open enrollment school because the data don't tell us what school they would have attended in their home district. They only tell us what their home district is. But we can get at this a little bit for those transitory open enrollments, those students who are less stable in their participation. And we get at that by comparing the school they open enroll into in 1 year to the school they attended in their home district the prior year, assuming they would have attended that school the next year as well if they had maintained schooling in their district of residence. And what we see here is relatively little difference in school quality. So for the performance index, there's a slight uptick, but graduation rates are the same. Value added is actually a little bit lower, and achievement's about a percentile higher. So it's a very mixed bag in terms of changes in school quality. But I want to be clear that this is only applicable to those students who are not that stable in their participation. students who participate consistently, we can't do this type of comparison. And it could very well be the case that they are achieving gains in school quality. We just don't have a way to measure that because we don't know what school they would have attended in their home district. And that's a really important caveat that I want to make sure that everyone understands. Of course, the ultimate goal of any sort of program is to realize superior student outcomes. And so what we did here is we look at the achievement growth of consistent open enrollers over time. And the way to read this graph is we set a baseline, keep pressing on the button, I'm sorry, at right here. And then we look at, in future years, does their achievement grow or decline over time, right? And if it's above the red line, we see achievement growth. If it's below, we see achievement declines. So relative to their own baseline, we don't see a lot of change in students' performance. They're doing about as well as they were when they started relative to the broader student population. However, when we compare these consistent open enrollers to students who never open enrolling, we do see gains, right? So even though these students aren't exhibiting gains relative to their own baseline, they're not seeing these achievement declines that other students who don't open enroll might be experiencing, that our data suggests are experiencing. So maintaining their level of achievement in this case is a better outcome than students who don't open enroll, who are actually seeing their achievement decline relative to the broader student population in the state. And we see these gains are largest for black students, although they are there, but smaller for white students. And so this is what we think is a pretty encouraging picture, that even though they're not seeing growth relative to their own baseline, they're seeing growth relative to comparable students who don't utilize interdistrict open enrollment. We also do this by regions of the state. We have rural areas in these two with high poverty and average poverty. We have small towns. We have the suburbs. And we have urban areas with high poverty and very high poverty. And again, we see not a lot of change relative to their own baseline, but when we compare it to students who do not utilize open enrollment, we see massive gains for students in urban areas with high poverty, but especially with very high poverty. We see also some gains for rural areas with high poverty, small towns with high poverty. So impoverished areas where students consistently use open enrollment, whether it's rural, small town, or urban areas, we see achievement gains relative to students who do not utilize open enrollment. For one cohort of students, we were able to look at the relationship between open enrollment participation and high school graduation. Our data just don't extend in over enough years to look at more than one cohort. But what we did is we limit our sample to those who open enrolled in 8th grade. So they have a familiarity with the program. We're not comparing apples to oranges. And then we compare students who continued to open enroll in high school to those who did not. And again, these are all students who open enrolled in 8th grade. We did a second comparison where we limited to students who did not open enroll in 8th grade, and I'll present that as a basis of comparison. But what the literature suggests is the best analysis in this case is limiting to students who are familiar with the program, which we define as open enrolling in 8th grade, and then comparing those who do and do not open enroll in high school. So what do we see? So those who open enrolled throughout their whole high school experience are almost certain to graduate on time. There's about 97% did so. Compared to those who open enrolled in 8th grade but did not open enroll in all their high school years, they graduated at about 80%, 79% I think was this precise number. So this is open enrolling in all your high school years. Open enrolling in any high school year, we still see a difference, right? It's about 90%, 88, 90%, somewhere in there, versus about 81%. So again, open enrollment is associated with a higher likelihood of graduating on time for the single cohort of students we could look at. That is a caveat that I want to make clear. And again, this is the comparison of students who did not open enroll in 8th grade. So these students did not open enroll in 8th grade. Those that open enrolled throughout all of high school were more likely to graduate on time. Those who open enrolled in 1 year in high school were slightly, but not statistically significantly, more likely to graduate on time. So what conclusions did we draw at a large, broad scale? 1, districts that refuse interdistrict transfers are very different from those that refuse transfers. They're more advantaged and they're disproportionately located in the suburbs around the Big 8. 2, students who use open enrollment consistently, especially, are relatively advantaged on socioeconomic and achievement dimensions, and they transfer to higher quality districts. Those who are not entirely stable in their participation don't see big changes in the quality of the school they attend, but we can't do that sort of comparison for students who are consistent in their participation. And finally, consistent open enrollers experience achievement benefits compared to students who never open enroll. These benefits, these gains are largest for Black students and those in high poverty, urban and rural areas. And the irony of this is that many of these students have among the least access to open enrollment. So they experience the greatest benefits but have the least access because of district participation decisions. And that's an interesting and important question, I think, that we'll probably discuss a bit in the panel discussion. And we have some evidence of improvements in high school graduation or of relationship between open enrollment and high school graduation. But that's based on only a single cohort of students and should be considered somewhat preliminary. And with that, I'd like to thank you and transition to the next stage of the event.
So we have, starting at the far end of the table, forgive me if I mispronounce it, I tried to practice, but I'm horrible with names. So, Gadah Hamad, a parent of a student who's using open enrollment. Geno Thomas Manning. Geno Thomas Manning is the superintendent at Reynoldsburg City Schools. Geno Thomas, the superintendent at Lowellville Local Schools. And Dr. Carlson. All right, there we go. We've got that out of the way. So the first question is for Tina. Your district, hold on a second, sorry. Open enrollment, as you heard from Dr. Carlson, is a voluntary policy in Ohio for both districts and students. So the first question is going to center on that and how these districts and parents sort of made that decision whether or not to participate. So Tina, your district is a relatively new participant in open enrollment, especially compared to the person on your right. Why did Reynoldsburg decide to participate in open enrollment? When you look around major cities in Ohio, most school districts don't participate when they surround one of our big 8 cities.
I would have to say, full disclosure, initially we decided to go down the road of opening our district borders to other students outside the district for selfish reasons. We found ourselves in a pretty unique situation where we had a lot of space in some of our school buildings. Our student enrollment appeared to be declining, although we had just been on the ballot and have built very sophisticated facilities and high school campuses, and our community expected us to fill those. And so initially it was a selfish decision. We had a lot of space and we wanted to utilize that space, and we thought this policy would be a very creative way to provide access for other students outside of our district, fill classrooms, and that's where we started. But we're at a different place now, and actually we're challenged around space, but we still embrace the policy and think it's very good for kids and has been good for our school district.
So the next question is for Geno. Your district, as I alluded to earlier, is an open enrollment veteran, having participated since at least the early 90s. I think 92 or 93
Yes.
was the first year I saw
Yes.
a record of it. So why did you decide to participate, or given that you may have been a student at the time, since that was so long ago, why have you continued to participate in open enrollment?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate being up here on the panel. Lowellville Local Schools was one of the first school districts in the state of Ohio to become an open enrollment district. And quite frankly, back in the early 90s, whenever the legislation passed and the board policy passed, everybody thought it was quite innovative for Lowellville schools to take that step into an open enrollment. Lowellville Schools has a total population K through 12 of about 600 students. 600, not 6,000, 600. And before open enrollment, it had probably less than 300 students at the time. So primarily, the basis for open enrollment, as similar to what Reynoldsburg was to increase the population of the schools. Well, over time, the population had stabilized and increased, and it has provided us multiple opportunities, not just to bring more students into the district, but for the offerings, the way that open enrollment is funded, for course offerings for our students. We have robotics, we have Italian as a language, we have bridge building, we have STEM courses. We have a new facility that was erected, also in partnership with the Ohio Schools Facility Commissions, but it had helped fund those types of programs. We have not had an operating levy on the ballot for over 25 years. And what's more important is we don't foresee that in the next 3 to 5 years, even though our 5-year forecast always shows a little bit of doom and gloom. And Lowellville, where it's situated within a valley of a little pocket of the Rust Belt, surrounded by Boardman, Youngstown City Schools, Poland, Ohio, Campbell City Schools, and Struthers City Schools, Lowellville's community is not very diverse. And the diversity from having over 50% of our student body today being open enrolled allows students within Lowellville not only to develop lifelong relationships and have exposure to different cultures, but most importantly, have access to programs in the wider region within Mahoning County. Quite frankly, we're very happy with open enrollment. We see it for a multi-purpose reason, and it's not a funding issue. It does help our schools, but it's much more deeper than just the funds.
Great. All right, the next question is for Gadah. The focus is usually on districts. That we usually think in systems when we're talking about education policy. But the program is designed to try to benefit students. So why did your family choose to participate in open enrollment? And can you tell us a little bit about your experience in that you've had? Obviously, there's been a success story with your daughter that's already been in the newspaper and written about. So can you tell us a little bit about why you participated and sort of what your experience has been?
Well, Dania and my daughter wanted more than what our school district was offering. Most schools won't let you do the college courses until you're a junior or a senior. Dania wanted to do that now. She was in 8th grade. And we knew that Reynoldsburg was connected to a Columbus State. And I really didn't know that they were open enrollment until I went to them and found out that this was something that they would, gladly accept Dania, and that she would be able to go to the Columbus State side. So she would be able to take advantage of both. So 2 years ago is when the CCP program was just starting out for kids, and also the open enrollment. So it was something that was very beneficial for my family. It was a location where I could get the best of both worlds. She was able to go there. She was able to go to the Columbus State side, also have high school. It was not too far from where we live. So it was a perfect fit for us. Dania excelled. She took courses during high school. She took courses after school, during the summer, online, just anytime she could. And Reynoldsburg City Schools were very helpful. They accepted everything that, she wanted to do. They were always on her side. And she graduated this May with her Associate of Arts degree. She was 15. She still is 15. And so she got her Associate of Arts before she got her high school diploma. So.
Well, congratulations.
And I did not pay for sitting here that
I know.
We did not know that we were going to be here.
All right, Devin, this question will be for you. Is there a difference in states where open enrollment is voluntary versus mandatory that you've observed? Any sort of differences, or in terms of location in the country, or differences you see in why they've sort of developed along the paths that they have? And by the way, the reason I'm asking him this question, he didn't go into his own credentials much, but he studied probably open enrollment more than any researcher in the country in terms of the objective, high quality data analytical analysis of open enrollment programs. And in terms of whether you see any differences, would you expect there to be a difference where open enrollment is mandatory versus voluntary?
It's an interesting question. The mandatory programs, they're kind of interspersed throughout. I mean, you see some in the Midwest, like Minnesota. You see Colorado has a well-known and well-used mandatory program. Then you see places like Ohio, where it's voluntary. I'm not sure there's a geographic relationship. I'll say, though, that even the mandatory programs have exceptions written into law that districts can use to, make them less than mandatory. Capacity is the major constraint, and if a district, they have substantial latitude in setting their capacity levels. Many of the districts that are attractive from an open enrollment perspective are those that are also growing and experiencing capacity issues. And so even in those states where mandatory open enrollment is the policy in theory, in practice it's often very difficult to achieve access to those types of schools because the districts that are appealing from a out-of-district student and family perspective are also appealing from people's perspective, and they have capacity problems.
Yeah, that's a very good observation with that, and that's helpful as we're thinking about, and it'll probably lead into some of our other questions too. So, all right, the next question is an open question for everyone, and that is there anything about the study that either surprised you or reinforced your own observation? And so I say it's open. Don't feel obligated to answer if there's nothing that surprised you. If you're like, yeah, this is what I expected to see. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to sort of extemporaneously to comment on this. And I'll start with Geno, and the reason is there's been some important research already done in your area of the state on open enrollment, and I thought maybe this might be a good opportunity for you to expound on some of that.
Sure. The research has been pretty stable, and you're talking about the significant value of open enrollment being comparable to resident students and not showing many gains. But the Mahoning County did a research project a few years back, about 2 years ago, I believe it was, with Dr. Karen Larwin out of Youngstown State University and Dr. Ronald Irusi, who's our Mahoning County Educational Service Center, studying open enrollment impacts of student achievement for the Mahoning County region of students or school districts that are participating voluntarily, ones that do not participate, students coming into school districts, and students going outside of school districts. Part of the study was spurred because of the Youngstown City Schools being put into academic distress through House Bill 70. They wanted to see if there truly is, if open enrollment truly did make an impact on students that traveled from one school to another. Lowellville, the best way to put it was quite refreshing as an anomaly. I don't know if it was an anomaly, it was not even an outlier. I mean, it was pretty consistent over the years that they found that students that were enrolling into the Lowellville Local Schools versus the resident students in the other districts, surrounding districts, outperformed the students from the other districts. And we had a few students, maybe 5 or 6, leave Lowellville Local Schools to go to other districts for open enrollment, and those students were not performing as well as if they would have stayed in our resident district to attain their academics. Now here's something that was quite fascinating for our district and with the study that really drew some attention regionally and probably statewide as well. The Youngstown City Schools, as you know, have been in academic distress for many years. And we have about 135, 140 students from the Youngstown City Schools that come to Lowellville Schools that make up the 600 plus population of our student body. Those students are performing, if not equal to, but better than our resident students and the overall population of all the students, and significantly outperforming other students in the Youngstown City Schools. Now, people might say, well, you got the good kids from Youngstown. That's an insult. These kids are academically or economically disadvantaged. These kids are multicultural type of students that are with broken homes, single-family homes. And there's transient issues and transportation issues that we face daily with these students trying to get them to come to Lowellville. And we had to get creative with that. We have carpools amongst parents that are willing to meet up in neighborhoods to bring the kids from the Youngstown City Schools and other school districts to the Lowellville Local Schools. We have drop-off areas for parents to come and drop their kids off in the morning. We've expanded our hours. There is not a time in the morning where you cannot drop your kid off in the morning. Now, how some school districts do not open their doors until 7:30. We've opened our doors, and we've manned and put people within the cafeteria to feed them a healthy breakfast. If they have to get there at 6:30, 6:45, so be it. We will be there for them, and we engage those students as if they were just a resident student within our school. And if you walk around our school district, which has campus wear, we've had uniforms, very strict. I know the kids don't like it. I'm a parent. I brought my daughter to Lowellville for the very reason, for the academics and the creativity and things that they do. You could not tell an open enrollment student from a resident educator student. The second facet that really shook the district up a little bit that I would be remiss if I didn't mention was the open enrollment students coming to Lowellville, comparing their statistics to our resident students. They were outperforming our students over a 5 and 10 year trend. Open enrollment students outperformed our resident students in Lowellville.
So somewhere
Slightly.
it's not surprising.
We're in the 90s. We're very, very effective, highly performing. But somewhere it is. So it's quite interesting to see that comparison. So I'm sorry.
No, you're good. That's a great story. Any surprises or other observations that either reinforce what you've seen or surprised you about the study?
Well, very similar to, each year, part of our policy, the board requires us to do a report out on student performance compared to open enrollment students compared to resident students on all those issues: discipline, attendance, grades, test scores, etc. And we find each year, and have for the past 7 years, that our open enrollees are students who are keeping pace, or in some instances, depending on what content is and grade level, and particularly in some buildings, our open enrollment students are outperforming our resident students. But definitely, we don't see any, we don't have any data or results that would suggest that bringing these kids to our district is kind of dumbing down our district or having some kind of negative impact. And I go on to say that really, I think your district is successful very much like Reynoldsburg, because we truly embrace the idea that these are our kids. Once the policy was adopted, and the policy every year is required. And sometimes we have to tweak the policy, and sometimes we do have capacity issues in certain schools, and we've worked around that. But we really do view these students as our kids, and after you've been with us for 1 year, providing you don't have the disciplinary issues that are outlined in the statute, we keep you. We bend over backwards to do everything we possibly can to have those students, our students, achieve and excel, as indicative of Dania, who's been such a wonderful success story. And our programs, people come to us because there's no secret that Reynoldsburg has been very outgoing and on the edge around trying things, doing things differently by any means necessary, embracing policy and legislation that a lot of school districts don't want to take on right away. The College Credit Plus program we are major supporters of, and as we should be. We have a college graduate right here in the audience because of 2 different pretty controversial policies: the open enrollment policy and the College Credit Plus, that not everybody wants to embrace. But in Reynoldsburg, we think those things work for kids, and we do everything possible to make sure when kids choose us, which we think is a pretty cool story, we do everything possible to make them feel at home and to have them succeed.
One thing that surprised me when Stefan and I were going about the project was when we put together the map of district participation decisions, just how stark that played out. I mean, you expect some districts to opt out, but I did not personally expect it to be so stark where Reynoldsburg is a notable exception, rather than the rule. And I think that has a lot of, interesting implications, for access to high-quality schools that, are important policy issues.
So when we saw the map, we noticed the same thing. We noticed there's a little donut around a lot of our cities. Hence, if you've come to these events before, you usually don't get donuts in the morning. So this is a little bit in celebration, or at least in recognition of the donuts around some of our cities. We usually cut the bagels differently too. You'll notice the bagels are round this time. You get a whole half a bagel. So there's a theme element at play. Thank you for that. The next observation is consistent open enrollees, I think you saw, have showed some pretty significant academic benefit depending on what their background was. But there are still a large number of students who use the program for a short time. So I think it'd be good to start with, from a parent's perspective, did you face any challenges or difficulties in using open enrollment? Or do your children miss out on anything because they live in a district different than where they attend school? So what are the challenges to being able to continue to open enroll?
So, first, I think going with the theme that these open enrollees are coming from different places, probably have more than one child, different levels, I have 5 kids. So Dania was there for 9th and 10th. And then I had an 11th and 12th grader with Eastland Fairfield going in bioscience in Gahanna. Then I had all the other 3 younger in Canal. So everybody chose a different day to have their in-service day. Everyone chose a different day, to have off, to start their vacation, spring, winter. That was very hard. And it's also, like, when I first signed up, my first question to everyone, whether it be at Reynoldsburg, whether it was when I signed up for the CCP, for everything, it was, is there any kind of transportation, any reimbursement, any help whatsoever? And it was kind of sad to say, nobody knew the answer. So there wasn't really a no, it was a, I don't know. And I don't know who the person to ask is. And let me try to find the answer for you, and I'll get back to you. But 2 years later, I still don't know the answer. I just saw here that there isn't any transportation, so I guess that answers it for me. But that was a big thing, is the staggered timing, or both, schools starting at the same time, trying to be 3 different places at once, traffic. At least I don't work. So for me, I dedicated my whole day and my life, obviously, for my kids. Anything that my kids wanted to do education-wise, I supported them. And I told them, like she said, they would bend backwards to keep that child. I would bend backwards to make sure that my kids would go to the school they wanted or partake in whatever it is they wanted to. But I think for other parents, that's a big problem. Because if it's going to be between a mom getting to her job or sending her kid to the local school because the bus stop is across the street, then I see where she's gonna go. She's not gonna be able to send her kid across town, especially in rush hour. So I think that's a big problem.
That's really helpful to talk about the transportation issue. Because you look at policies, but sometimes seeing how they're actually impacted on the ground. So now I'll give the superintendents a shot at this. You guys have already hinted at some of the things you're already doing, but what challenges have you observed your open enrollees facing? Now, you've had tremendous success, so let's pretend there's only 1 or 2 students who've struggled with open enrollment. So what problems have they had, and are there things your districts are doing to make it easier for them, expanded hours for drop-off and things like that?
Absolutely. I would totally go along and second the whole issue around transportation. And the answer in Reynoldsburg is there's no requirement in the policy that we provide transportation for open enrollment students, but the answer is yes, we do. Providing you, the parent, can get the child to a bus stop within the district, within the boundaries of Reynoldsburg, we will transport your student from a bus stop we have established to the desired school. So the answer is kind of yes and no. Yes, if you can get them into Reynoldsburg, we'll get them to school. But we have found, by and large, that transportation is a huge barrier, particularly for our younger students who, are not in charge of driving themselves to school and can't be. We have some challenges around attendance and tardiness, particularly with elementary age kids. And in a perfect world and with limited resources, and even with the existing resources, I think that there's an opportunity for us to get creative around transporting students who choose Reynoldsburg. I think we can analyze where an influx of our students, for example, is coming from the city of Columbus. We get kids from Winchester, Gadah, Columbus. We have a nucleus of students that we know are coming to us from Columbus. I think we should identify where that neighborhood is, and perhaps there should be a bus that we allocate and send into that neighborhood to make, the transition less fretful and anxious for families and more access for kids. I believe if we could do that, we would expand our access. Sticky wicket about that is you've got a community base and you've got limited resources, and you've got to be able to justify every single thing you're doing and make sure you're taking care of the taxpayers' money. So, but there are opportunities I see.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm thinking about the crazy the bus schedules I see with buses going all over town, partly to drive students maybe from Reynoldsburg to a private school inside Columbus, or to a charter school somewhere. And so because transportation is provided for those options, your buses are going all over town in many cases. So it is interesting if depending on how creative we're able to be, what opportunities there might be. Gina?
Talking about policy, one of the policy changes we made 2 years ago, whenever, actually been there for 3 years, when I first came on, I noticed that students in our resident district, if they moved, they could not open enroll back to Lowellville because there was a time frame when open enrollment would accept students. So we went to a year-round open enrollment, which allowed them not to be transient, have to enroll into a different school, but they wanted to stay because sometimes domestic issues and court placements or financial issues or whatever, economic issues, parents and residents would leave Lowellville and still want to attend, obviously, Lowellville local schools. The other piece is transportation. Your question about Ohio Revised Code 3314 with community schools, or as the synonymous term is charter schools in the United States, the resident district has to provide transportation or some form of transportation voucher. Students who go to parochial schools, same thing. There's a voucher for parents with transportation, but students who decide to or select a school choice to come to Lowellville from one public institution to another, we don't have a transportation voucher or any type of reimbursement. So we do have to be creative, whether it's with carpooling and also with having drop-off spots within our district area. And it's starting to give us, we're starting to move into another challenge with open enrollment, because we do have people that want to come to Lowellville. We do participate in College Credit Plus. We have quite a wide array of extracurricular activities and interscholastic activities that students can participate. And with those students going to Youngstown State University, we've been developing a model in Lowellville, and of course we're inhibited by the funding right now. We're trying to still continue to write grants to create a blended model for our students that would be able to partner with Youngstown State University. We've met with the vice president and several of the deans, and they're willing to do this, but it would enhance our district's capacity and Youngstown State University's capacity to allow expanded coursework for the College Credit Plus, to have people graduate with the associates and still be 15 years old, like your daughter did, which is quite impressive. That's growing increasingly amongst our staff, is trying to figure out how we can create that model to have that blended sense with the technology. And it's a challenge, it's a barrier. But we believe once we be able to implement that model, and we're doing some strategic planning and trying to write grants, then our open enrollment opportunities again will flourish and continue for the students who want to come to Lowellville. and YSU is willing to partner and participate with them.
Yeah, so one thing I've noticed looking across the country is a common challenge is transportation. You
Yes.
look at any state that has interdistrict open enrollment, and you ask people what are the challenges, and it's invariably transportation comes up. And I think part of that comes from the fact that, you know, there's not an advocacy group that tries to figure out challenges for interdistrict open enrollment like you have for charter schools in many places, like you have for private school voucher programs. You have, like in New Orleans, which is 100%, nearly 100% charter at this point, they have the same transportation problems, but you have this set of nonprofit organizations and advocacy organizations that work through those challenges. And there's no analogous set of organizations that I've come across in any state that has interdistrict open enrollment that works to address the challenges that
You know, it's all about access. It's about equal access. I mean, there's a state park in Boardman, not in Lowellville. Since I live in Lowellville, am I not allowed to attend that state park and go to that state park and use it? The state monies that are contributed to the school districts should allow for the transportation. And like I said, that's something we've done with the legislatures about. You're right, it's about access, equal access for all students. Good point.
All right, I want to get two more questions, then I want to turn it over to you. If you're just going to sit there and eat your donuts and not ask questions, then I'll ask more. The first question will be for Gadah, and that is, over the years, there have been calls to study open enrollment or even do away with it by some legislators. So if you had the opportunity to say to a legislator, hypothetically if they're all in here, who questioned the value of open enrollment or wanted to end it, from a parent's perspective, how important is a program like this in the array of options you have?
I think it's very important. With everything going on in the world today, and you see that everyone wants to have a voice, you know, everyone wants freedom of speech, freedom to choose, freedom of everything. I think that the freedom to pick your education is one of the most important, because this is what shapes the children. So I think that them being able to choose where they want to go and what they want to learn really will benefit them. So Dania really wanted, you know, she wants to be a lawyer. She wants to work in the government. She wants to one day, you know, work at the UN. And I feel like had she just been in a regular high school, not that there's anything wrong with being in a regular high school, but those leadership and government and political science skills that she wanted is lacking in a regular school, or at least in her home school. So I don't think that she would have had the want that she has right now had she not gone to Bell Academy, had she not been exposed to, you know, her very first Columbus State class being government and law, had she not been able to choose and had them build her up. I mean, I just feel that she found herself, and I feel that every child should have that right, you know, and I don't think that that should be taken away.
See, when you're asking questions, you always try to plan it out, but that should have been the last question, because that was a great answer. But I do have one more. I'm going to ask it just in the spirit of being provocative, like Fordham sometimes is. This is for both Tina and Geno, and that is, in discussing most choice programs, especially vouchers and charters, there's often a discussion about those programs siphoning or stealing funds from school districts. The funding mechanism for open enrollment, while not exactly the same, is very similar. Do you face the same sort of rhetoric? Do other superintendents snub you at conferences and fail to invite you to holiday parties because you take so many open enrollment students? If you don't want to answer this, I can speculate. You don't have to. But.
Well, you know, Reynoldsburg has historically been a school district that embraces the idea of choice. Many years ago, we took our first charter school that we sponsored over 20 years ago. So we have always promoted and embraced the idea of school choice, and we believe it's important that families like this family, very lovely family, have the opportunity to choose. And when they choose us, that's wonderful. There's no greater vote of confidence than when somebody wants to choose your school district. They're not stuck in their resident school, so that's wonderful for us. So we promote choice. We think it's the right thing to do, and we also understand and recognize that not every student is going to be successful in our school district. And so with that comes, we gotta play on both sides, right? So we recognize that there are gonna be kids that we can't serve, and will be better served in other facilities, other programs. Sometimes those are charter schools, and they should have that right.
I'll be politically incorrect. I started my career in Ohio, 1998. We never had a large urban. It was about 7,500 kids at the time, and one of the first initiatives that the district wanted to undertake was their graduation rate. They were graduating about 70% of the students. So we opened up a charter school, community school in 3314, for academically distressed students at risk of not graduating or dropout. It was one of the first schools in the state. It's called STAR, Students Traveling Accelerated Routes to Success. We implemented a research-based, and I say that, a lot of research went in. It's easy to say that blended model that what we developed and was allowed at the time by the Office of Community Schools. And it drew probably close to 300 students from the surrounding districts. Not once did we ever get a superintendent or a high school principal say, you're taking our kids, you're taking our money. And at the end of the year, we graduated 175 students. Of those dropouts were at risk of dropping out at an 89% rate, which quite frankly got the attention of the entire region, because if the Mansfield City Schools could not get above 70%, and the dropout students in this little pocket of excellence, as I call it, and believe me, the people that worked there is what mattered. It was a little bit different how we staffed it and everything, got 89%, what do we do? So we opened up a second one that was called IMAC. It was a tech prep community school, interactive media and construction technology. And it didn't just cater to the at-risk youth, it allowed all and any youth that would like to learn a trade, partnering with Coast Construction and local Regency or local businesses around the region. We started to hear, you're taking our kids, you're taking our money. It's going to your school. Every 15th of every month at midnight, whenever the CSADM funds would flow, we would get calls, why are you taking our kids, why are you advertising? We're not advertising, the kids were advertising, and we were filling up that program as well. So it's two-sided. It's almost as if it's an object of convenience whenever a student leaves that you probably would not traditionally want in a school district, and they hurt your test scores, it's okay. They create a little funnel. But whenever students come because of the excellence of the programs within a school district, and I'd like to say that with Lowellville, I didn't create that. They created that culture of high standards and high expectations to staff, and I'm privileged to be there. I've only been here for 3 years. But we're not hearing from other school districts vocally, you're taking our money, you're taking our kids. We don't hear it from parochial schools. Maybe it's not politically correct to say to the parochial schools, well, you're taking our money or your kids are losing money. But with community schools, with that school choice option, it seems to be rampant that these schools, they call them these schools, are taking our kids. Well, show me in state law where kids, based upon where they reside, belong to a specific school district. I mean, you think about the money following the student, it should follow the student. Competition is good for education. I've been on both sides, high-performing districts, middle-performing districts with about 5,000 kids, and low-performing districts, larger student population. Competition is good for education in the right sense. And school choice for parents, they should be able to choose where their tax dollars go and not just based upon the boundaries in which they live in, if it's reasonable. I mean, it's something that we have to take a hard look at.
I was worried about being provocative.
Yeah, no, I had to say it, because I've lived it long enough, and there's benefits for both sides. I think I've always been an advocate for school choice.
All right, now it's your turn, Barbara.
Well, I have a comment and then a question. First, to clarify, I think in the presentation, Deven, you said that state dollars only go to the other district, and technically you might be right, but the district of residence only gets a percentage of the state amount for those kids. So Lowellville and Reynoldsburg get more money for those students that open enroll than they do for their districts, the kids that stay in the district. So just to make sure that that's understood, that's not a pro or con, that's just fact. So technically speaking, you're making money on those kids that come in because you get more, you don't have the state share deducted. Or
We're
share.
getting almost a full state foundation,
Yeah.
about 6,000 per student, and we're spending it very wisely. There are school districts that have open enrollment just for the financial purposes and mismanage their funds and have
Well,
lost.
so that's kind of where I was
Quite
going
substantial.
next. I didn't know
Yeah,
if you all have had, because
Absolutely.
Ohio's Auditor of State has come out
Yes.
locally against, I mean, I assume they haven't said anything about your district
No.
because you are in financial health. But other districts
Austin
that.
Town, they've come out locally
Yes.
about, and this is all public information, in Hubbard Exempted Village School District. And it's about management of funds. You know, and can I just piggyback on that for a little bit? I remember being in Mansfield City Schools, my first principalship of about 350 students at Newman Elementary. We found out that we had over $10,000 in title monies that we did not spend at the end of the year. And everybody's saying, well, great, let's hire another paraprofessional. I said, no, it's not about just hiring more people. We decided to partner with Barnes & Nobles, get students on a bus and take them to Barnes & Nobles, and everybody buy 2 books for the summer. And we paid the $10,000 to Barnes & Nobles, allow those students not only to go to the mall and to shop and get their books, but they had one rule. We laid out the tables in the hallways for that year. After the summer, bring your books back and we'll have a book sharing program. Only half of the books came back. And people were saying, well, these kids kept these books. Good. Good. I wish none of the books came back. So they shared them. It's about how we utilize and use those funds for the students. So yes, we do benefit by having the full state foundation, almost full state foundation, coming to our following the student. But on the other hand, we do spend it very wisely and are careful not to just do add-ons or have luxurious.
Well, and
So
from,
that's
so
true.
from a state policy perspective, though,
Yeah.
that is one reason why maybe the other districts might have some resentment.
Absolutely they do. Absolutely.
The other question, I guess, is for Deven, as far as, I mean, I think the parent example here, to me, contributes to why these kids are so successful. Does that factor in your research?
I mean, we provide kind of the high level data-based view of how the program is operating. There are millions of variations and individual stories that underlie these aggregate numbers that I presented to you. And you know, we try to address as well as we can when we're presenting some of these results, the fact that some students and families might be more motivated, like those sorts of things absolutely come into play, and we're cognizant of them. And you, in the report, in the technical appendix, we discuss our approach to addressing them. That said, you can never be 100% sure that all of it is taken care of given the data we have available to us. So we're absolutely cognizant of the fact that there might be some unmeasured factors that drive participation in open enrollment that we're not able to capture in our analysis. But we're straightforward about that in our report, and we state that explicitly. That said, we're confident in the numbers we present and the aggregate analyses of student achievement trajectories and relationship to an open enrollment and graduation rates. But if you, the technical appendix lays out all those sorts of concerns and issues that you encounter in analysis like this.
I think you need to be prepared, and I'd say for Reynoldsburg, we have just about 700 open enrollees in our district. And when you embrace that policy, you need to be prepared to fully embrace it with recognition that the students you attract really are a microcosm of the students we have in our district. And many students come to us with challenges. They're not all Daniels, you know. We love them to be, but not everybody that comes to us as an open enrollee is going to graduate high school at the age of 15 with an associate's degree. We have kids and families that come to us because they're 2 and 3 years behind in their school district at reading and academically, and they want, and we have a reputation taking kids where they are and moving them forward. So I think it's important that you understand, and I'm sure you know this, but you hear from me that not every one of our 700 students that come to us is, you know, a Dania. They're all very different and have different needs, and we embrace those needs and meet them where they are and take them as far as we can.
Other questions? Please.
Yeah, I'm very new to here, this area, because I came to America 2 months ago as a visiting scholar at Miami University. To the Dr. Carlson, I have 2 questions, and probably we can answer the question as well. So first of all, you dealt with the interdistrict open enrollment, but as you may know, there are 2 forms of the open enrollment, such as intra and intra. So, Big 8 in Ohio, you didn't deal with the intra enrollment. So, because I'm very new here, I'm right or not. But do you think the, for instance, Columbus School District, do they have an open enrollment in terms of the intra-district?
So states have different policies regarding intra-district enrollment, open intra-district, and we did not even touch intra-district open enrollment in this report. This report focuses solely on between districts. I think there are a lot of interesting questions surrounding intra-district open enrollment, and No Child Left Behind effectively mandated intra-district open enrollment in schools that failed to make adequate yearly progress for, I think it was 3 or 4 years. And so that has precedent not only in state law but also in federal law. That said, we focus exclusively on inter-district in this report and don't touch intra-district.
I'll add on a little bit to that. A lot of the big districts in Ohio do have very vibrant choice programs within their school districts. And I think they've done it to provide better options and better fits for many of their students. I know in Cincinnati, my understanding is you're not even assigned to high school. You apply and choose where you go based on available seats. And I know in Columbus, there are a lot of choice options as well. There's also a lot of magnet schools districts have created, many of them that are open enrollment. They're magnet in that they can take anyone from anywhere in the district. So there are a lot of vibrant options, and part of that is the dynamic, I think, that people have recognized, that you want to have as many options for your students to make sure they all find an environment where they can get what they need to be successful. So I think there is that. It's very harder to study, because in the state data system, we may not have a good indication of who was actually zoned to a school, because sometimes a school will take both zoned kids and kids that opt into it, and it might be hard to know how a student appeared there. So it makes the research question a lot harder.
Okay. This first question relates to my second question. So open enrollment has a very good pros and bad cons, I believe. So some of the opponents may say that open enrollment may take best students from the district. It is another issue besides the funding and transportation. So I don't know the parents' state of their economy, but best student goes to their some district beyond the home district. How do we deal with those students who cannot go to their beyond the district? So, Dr. Carlson, how do you deal with the kind of situation that opponent may say you are taking best students?
So I'll say 2 things. One, state law states for those who apply to open enroll, districts aren't allowed to accept on the basis of academic, artistic, or athletic ability. Now that doesn't affect, which I think you might be referring to, that different students might apply to open enroll from those who don't. And that's, I mean, that's a reality in any choice program across the country. Different students might choose to attend charter schools. Different students might choose to attend private school vouchers. And it's something that's been researched pretty significantly. Creaming is what the literature refers to quite routinely. And there's mixed evidence on it. There is some evidence that in some contexts, yes, there is some evidence that the higher achieving students are those who select into. But there's evidence for other contexts where that's not the case. And so I think it's a very context-specific concern, and it needs to be taken on a case-by-case basis rather than a broad, a broad assumption that the best students are or are not going to opt into any given choice program.
And I think your question and Barb's question earlier both lend themselves to the potential of having an additional research piece on this. Given that some districts, and I didn't learn this until I had this conversation today, get far more open enrollment applications than they can serve, some students who are equally desire to be in that school district, some get a yes, some get a no. We might actually have an opportunity for a more gold standard type research there. Of course, if there are funders in the audience who would like to see that happen, we can figure out how to make that occur. But there might be an opportunity, especially if districts get hundreds each year, they take half and then they have to reject half. That might be interesting to follow those students' individual trajectories.
I haven't read anything. Does your study ask any why parents have chosen? Is there any clear?
We don't have any survey data.
Okay.
It's based solely on the administrative records.
Yeah, so you may not be able to answer the question, but is there any research regarding the effects of open enrollment on the students in the home districts that participate in the programs, both those that have the students leaving the district and the districts that have the students coming in who are not participating in open enrollment?
Like spillovers is.
So like the students who are not participating in open enrollment, but the ones who are in the districts who are participating in it, but not the individual students. So like there's a student in Reynoldsburg.
We do. We find our resident students in our district that leave either parochial, charter, or open enrollment perform more poorly than our resident students that stay. We find that our students, resident students that are in our school district, looking at the total population of all the schools where they come, open enrollment to Lowellville, the open enrollment students are outperforming our resident students, and they're both, again, at a very high level in the 90s. We did study that, we did find that. So we have a very strong case to tell people, stay in Lowellville. If you leave, here's what's going to happen. You're going to perform the research and studies. This is longitudinal over 10 years. It's suggesting that you will not perform as well as if you did stay in Lowellville. And mind you, half of our district is on the Pennsylvania line. We only have a small portion of districts, contiguous districts, that we can pull from. That's why we go statewide and open enrollment, so they can cross double borders.
And if I think about the academic literature, that's a really interesting question, and I don't think that there is any work in the academic literature that addresses just that, but
That's one district, it's
Yeah.
small sample size, but that's what we found.
But a follow-up to his question, I don't know if this is what you meant to ask too. Lowellville's able to offer some incredibly unique programs
Yes.
because you have these extra students. The district that lost those students may have fewer resources to do the same. So that, I guess, is part of the debate.
All right, one last question. There you go.
So Tina mentioned attendance issues, and I'm just curious if you looked at attendance as a student.
we didn't. But it would be interesting to do, because that is, that's one of the benefits of talking to people on the ground is you get ideas that, yeah, that makes sense. That could be an issue. But we didn't, but we should, and we will.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for coming and to thank our panelists for sharing so much great information.